What is up, ZZ Proxies? It's your boy Josh, and today we're coming at you with a tier list video through PRYDWEN.gg. Yeah, we are going to be taking a look at their 1.1 second half update as JaneDoe comes into the fold, and let's see how she shakes up the cast and potentially brings up or maybe pushes down some characters in terms of value. And spoiler, I think this is probably the most realistic, most comprehensive list that they've had ever since the games come out. And now let's start off the ball rolling with, of course, JaneDoe. JaneDoe topping out of tier 0 as the anomaly DPS. I'm very happy that they were able to differentiate the pure DPSs yet anomaly DPSs just because they function differently. I understand if I were, a tier list maker, I would probably just put all the DPS or follow-up characters in their own relative tier. Instead of DPS or anomaly DPS, I would just consider them as follow-up damage, personally, just because your stuns and supports set up the damage, right? But as so far as JaneDoe, she does still require a bit of setup in order to reach those higher millions of damage. She isn't naturally hitting a million damage just by herself alone. Firstly, is tier 0 appropriate for JaneDoe? I think with the millions that JaneDoe hits, I think it answers itself. JaneDoe more than likely is one of the best characters in the game, with the exception of high invested Juyen. Now, of course, you could say any high invested character, even Ellen-Jo, can hit incredibly hard. But when it comes to the ROI, right, the amount of investment you have to put into the character, I would say that out of the 3 follow-up DPS characters of Ellen, Juyen, and of course Jane, she is probably the easiest to build, and she can hit for incredible numbers. Of course, a lot of it is front loaded through Assault, which is her attribute anomaly, but that goes without saying that still she is an incredible DPS across the board from budget into high investment. And for a lot of folks, this actually marks a shifting point in how we view Zenless Zone Zero. Initially, we had Ellen-Jo and Juyen as quote-unquote the PRYDWEN pure DPSs, right? The pure follow-up DPSs where you stun, support for a little bit, you get your Nicoles out, you quick assist into Juyen, and then during that stun period. Whereas JaneDoe is able to actually build up anomalies prior to the stun and still do incredible damage. And then when you get into the stun, which, very soon we'll be able to talk about, stun brings her to a whole nother level. When it comes to JaneDoe, she brings about 2 different archetypes of teams, right? She brings along the anomaly or disorder-based teams, and then she brings along her own just general physical assault hyper carry-esque type of team, right? And that includes a lot of stunners, in particular, burst stunners. And let's take a look at Ambi and Kaleda. They get a huge bump in value. I think both of them go up a tier just because we've started to discover that the amount of time that it takes to get into the stuns is so much quicker with those burst stun characters. So it allows more time for a JaneDoe to be on the field dealing more damage. And as so far as the characters of Lycon and Qingyi, I personally feel as though Lycon, even though he is incredibly strong, he doesn't see as much value when it comes to Juyen and JaneDoe teams, where I feel like we can actually push him down a tier and keep him at 0.5, just because Ellen-Jo is losing every bit of value. With every new DPS character, they're just getting stronger and stronger, easier to build, more flexible, that I feel as though Ellen-Jo, probably in 1.2, is bumped down to tier 1. But that's just my own opinion. Of course, I believe she's still incredibly strong, but in terms of just holistically looking at the character, the ease of access of JaneDoe's attribute anomaly, right? The assault is it's just absurd, right? You can hit naturally 200, 300 Ks so easily with her, and in the span of, let's say, like 8 to 12 seconds every time, if you play her correctly within her rotations. And then, right, once you build up to that stun and build up to that assault anomaly build up, she is just assaulting average 3 times per stun window. It's incredible. So thus bringing up the value of those burst stun characters, a la the Kaledas and Ambis. Lycon, I feel, is at the cusp a little bit. Still very strong, right? Still very much tied to Ellen-Jo, But in saying that, he is tied to Ellen Jo as one of her best running mates, whereas Lycon kind of loses out quite a bit when it comes to the other two front-running DPS characters, and especially even with, you know, let's say a Nekomata, right? Nekomata, Hyper Nekomata, you know, Assault is actually incredibly strong still, doesn't see Lycon at all. So the top running DPS team aren't running Lycon as much anymore. I would feel as though he would be bumped down to 0.5. But again, maybe I'm thinking a little bit too much in the future. Maybe down a month or two, we'll be able to see that change. But Qingyi is just the premier stunner, and even though she takes up a little bit of time, or excuse me, a little bit more time than you know, the Kaledas and Ambies of the world, the value of the extra stun damage multiplier is worth it. So thereby which she actually brings that value for the extra couple seconds that she is on the field. Versus Lycon, he's still a little bit capped. Then comes the supports, and I'm so freaking happy for Nicole. Everybody, let's give a round of applause. Tier 0 for Nicole, everybody. And she absolutely deserves it. Just because Nicole is one of the most flexible units in the game, and she is one of the most valued units in the game for her CC control. When you take a look at a game like Genshin Impact, even though this game is only a month in particular Zenless Zone Zero, when we took a look at Genshin, Venti was just so incredibly strong because of his grouping potential. Yes, down the road we are going to see more enemies, more bosses that are resistant to this type of drawing the CC power, which might dilute a little bit Nicole's potential, but the amount of debuffs that she's able to provide, as well as the very valuable AoE in terms of smaller or multi-mob rounds, Nicole is just that girl, that bitch. So I'm very, very glad she's up there. Of course, Julian is a huge contributor to her value. But when it comes to even characters like JaneDoe, you could even see JaneDoe and be Nicole and still have so much success. It is what amazing value out the box out of these two characters when it comes to, the free-to-play characters. We do not give them enough praise. They are actually so flexible. They are just multifaceted, right? Ambi's kit, quite simple, yet incredibly effective. Nicole being up there now, just due to, the potential with Julian, Double Ether, and then, still the use cases with JaneDoe and Ambi, right, are incredible. So we might see Sokaku jumping back down to 0.5. However, a lot of people are anticipating another particular ice character to be showing up relatively soon. So maybe in anticipation of said ice character, we'll keep Sokaku up in her rightful spot in tier 0. I think she's still incredibly strong. She is the Bennett of Zenless Zone Zero, and the attack buff is too hard to ignore. She is incredible. So, still deserved one of the best buffers in the game, but kind of wavering a little bit, right? Those ice teams are slowly dying out a little bit just because ice is paired with ether when it comes to a lot of enemy weaknesses, right? So if you were to look at the character archetypes, you look at either fire physical or you look at ether ice, and then electric's on its kind of own little trajectory. So having characters like Anton, Grace, Rena, they're very, very strong, in particular Qingyi as well, in order to shred that electric, right? And then get into the stun very quickly, just shred off that shield super fast. So when it comes to Sokaku, in terms of the investment into the teams that she is highlighted in, it's a little bit hard to say that she holds this much value still, but across the board, she is usable, right? The attack buff is usable for all 3 of the follow-up DPS characters. Still a very welcomed addition to your squad, Sokaku is. Then we get to the new cat on the block. Let's take a look at Seth Lowell. I'm very glad that he is rated quite highly at 0.5. I think at M0, 0.5 is quite generous. When it comes to M2, M4, he jumps up tier 0 easily. And I understand to where you still want to tier list him as a budget option, but if you're going to pull for JaneDoe, you're probably getting M1 at least. And even M1, M2 with the anomaly buildup rate, in terms of being able to allow him to function in conjunction with the shock pairing as Grace or Rena, that already automatically brings into tier 0 in my eyes. And of course, that M4 is just that impact. Really important, especially if you're, you know, offsetting the stun needs from a pure stunner like a Chingy and then moving it towards Seth. Of course, the value definitely comes from M1 through M4. M6 is just a damage increase. Nothing that really pushes the needle for me. That M4, M2, M1, really impactful for his buffing potential, for his potential to contribute to anomaly, as well as impacting for stun. So ideally, you guys can go for M4 Seth while pushing for JaneDoe. Of course, some people, you know, only need 10 pulls. You're already at like 60 pity for JaneDoe and you're confirmed. So that's a little bit of a bummer. Seth is that valuable of a character and he moves up to tier 0 easily heading into 1.2 when you consider there are characters like Caesar and Bernice. Not necessarily Caesar, but Bernice especially. And looking at the trajectory of the game, sure, there are your other ice characters that could potentially be coming that brings back that pure follow-up DPS. Then we're going to get a much broader cast, whereas right now we only have Ellen-Jo Juyen. As we move more towards Anomaly and get a broader cast with Anomaly, I feel like Seth's value just increases tenfold just because he's one of, if not the only characters that buffs with AP. Then comes Lucy. I'll be honest, Lucy should already be tier 0.5 already. In my opinion, should already be tier 0.5. And yes, understandably, you want to wait till Caesar and Bernice comes around. Of course, when Bernice comes around, Lucy is going to be right up there with, you know, double Pyro, Sons of Caledon Resonance. She's going to be the premier buffer right along Sokaku, right with Ellen-Jo. But even without the presence of Bernice, Lucy's value as an attack buffer, even though it might not span Sokaku's, it's still incredibly valuable when it comes to JaneDoe Kaleda Lucy, when it comes to Piper Kaleda Lucy, or, you know, Piper Chingy Lucy, or you know, however you want to spin that Piper Lucy, you know, duo. It's really good. It's already so freaking good. And the only reason why Piper is in tier 1 is just because she can't deal as much damage as JaneDoe. That's just purely it. She is still an incredible character. You know, in terms of the beginning of the game, when we added Piper and Lucy, we didn't have those two characters in the closed beta. And now for them to really start to blossom a little bit more, and then, you know, granted, Piper and Lucy, or excuse me, Piper and JaneDoe don't work together as well as you would like, but it's still incredibly strong. You just can't ignore that. They're still incredibly strong. Tier 1, I believe, is respectable. I would like to see her just like there was like a tier a little higher, I would definitely put her there. Lucy definitely should be in 0.5 already. Whereas Rena, I'm not gonna lie, Rena as the secondary, you know, shock support character for an anomaly team, let's say, you know, JaneDoe Grace Rena or JaneDoe Seth Rena, you're getting a lot of value out of them. You're getting a lot of value out of her pen down. You're getting a lot out of her shock anomaly duration increase with Seth, right? If you don't have Grace, right, you need a way to be able to extend those shock durations, and you need to be have a way to more consistently be able to have those windows for your Jane to utilize that extra bonus on her core, right? So as far as Rena's, you know, M1 in particular is what's being highlighted when it comes to JaneDoe teams. Rena is incredibly strong. Does that mean that she is 0.5 material? I'm okay with leaving her at tier 1. I respect PRYDWEN leaving her at tier 1 just because the other use cases aren't as high. And again, you can get away with JaneDoe Seth core with literally anything else. Oh, and as a side note, I totally danced around Grace. Grace being at 0.5. Now, I think that's an appropriate place to put her again, just because she isn't a pure DPS. It's just much easier to, you know, slot in these characters into these 0.5s versus tier 0, tier 1, tier 2. Comes to Grace, utilize in multiple different facets, in particular with the JaneDoe Seth Grace team. Actually really solid, right? But again, isn't that tipping point of Rena. She does great damage if you were to highly invest into her. She does incredible damage. But is Grace a tier 0? By no means, no. I think she is really solid, but she does require a good running mate like the JaneDoe in order to really realize a team potential. right? Just because Dot Electro, there's a reason why Anton is down here. When it comes to Grace, I think she's still really, really valuable, still a contributing member. 0.5, I think, is even a little bit higher than I would rate her. I would even put her into tier 1. She's definitely higher rated than, or, you know, higher usage and higher rated than the Soldier 11. So maybe 0.5 is the appropriate place to put her. Or I would just say at like, you know, when it comes to tier 1, she tops tier 1. So as so far as, you know, now an inclusion with 2 anomaly characters in JaneDoe and Grace, and then 2 pure follow DPS characters. These 2, I think, again, this list is coming along quite well, and Zenless Zone Zero's cast is rounding out pretty well as so far as the first 2 months. But what matters is your opinion, so let me know in the comments down below. Like the video if you guys enjoyed this tier list review, and of course, subscribe to catch more. Click on this next video because YouTube thinks you'll like it. Thanks so much for joining. My name's Josh. See you in the next one.